The things that makes the Yud Gimel Middos very difficult is that the common drushos the Gemara makes, the common arguments that it makes, are based on the Yud Gimel Middos, but it'll often not be identified. If it's a Kal V'chomer, it'll tell you a Kal V'chomer, Mamatzinu, Gzei Reshava, those things will be labeled. But a Klal Ufrad Klal is labeled. But some of the Middos I'm going to talk about today are not labeled. The Gemara just darshans, and it's like the tip of an iceberg, and underneath the drasha is the midah, even though the midah is not articulated in the context itself. So today we're going to look at two of the middos, midah number 8 and midah number 11, and here I'll try to give you mamish examples, tangible examples, so you'll understand the middos a little better. Midah number 8 says, Kol davar shahya bichlal, anything that was in a general category, v'yatsa min haklal lelamed, and it was stated separately from the klal to teach me something new. Lo lelamed al atzmo yatsa, it does not come to teach you something new only about itself. Ela lelamed al haklal kulo yatsa. It was stated separately to teach me about the whole klal from which it came. So you read those words, probably, the mind doesn't compute to anything. So let me give you an example right away. In Parshas Mishpatim, we read 2 weeks ago, Machashefa lo sechaya. A woman or a man that's a witch, someone that engages in sorcery, in magic, lo sechaya, you will not keep alive, you are mechuyev to kill. Now that's a klal, because that's kolel, all types of magic. There are many different types of magic. The Torah often specifies them. Ov, Yidoni, Shoel, or whatever it would be. The Torah says all practitioners of magic get the death penalty. That is a klal. That's a general statement. All magic practitioners, although it mentions women, that already is a separate issue. Rashi says that's only because women were more frequently sorcerers than men. Okay, so let's ignore the male-female thing. But kol machshefa, all magic. Now the problem is, there's a little bit of data that you're still missing from that pasuk, and that is there are 4 different death penalties that the Torah has. There is skila, which is stoning. Actually, just for definition, stoning is not like you throw stones at somebody. The Mishnah explains stoning is actually you push somebody off a cliff, and then you throw stones on top of them. They're already dead in all probability. Sreifa, burning, also is not burning at the stake. Again, this sounds pretty horrible. It actually means pouring molten metal down their throat. That does sound very horrible, but I assure you it is quick. So, okay. Then we have chenek is strangulation, and hereg is decapitation. So, the Torah says, machashefa lo sechaya, but it doesn't tell you which misa. But we have another pasuk that says, shoel ov v'yidoni. Now, these are 2 particular types of magic. A shoel ov is someone who brings up the dead. Yidoni is they put a certain bone in their mouth, and they can cause the bone to talk, whatever it would be. A shoel ov and yidoni gets stoning, gets skila. So here's the issue. I have a klal that says all sorcery gets death penalty, but I don't know which one. I then have something that was included in that klal, because shoel ov and yidoni were included in that statement. And in that, so it's a yatsa min haklal, but then it was stated separately to teach me skila. So the question is, does it teach me skila only for ov and yidoni? Or is it megala that the whole klal from which it came should be skila? So let's look at the words, and let's plug in this example. Kol davar shahya bichlal. anything that had been included in a general category. What would that mean? Ov and Yidoni were included in the words machashefa. V'yotza min haklal. But the Torah then deals with it separately, l'lamed, to teach me something. What is it teaching me? That the particular death penalty is skila. Lo l'lamed al atzmo yatsa. It is not only there to teach me about itself. In other words, that Yidoni gets skila. Ela l'lamed al haklal kulo yatsa. It was mentioned separately to teach me about the whole generalization from which it came, that when the Torah says the witch shall not live for any type of magic, it means the punishment is skila. Meaning, without this mead, I might have said, well, I know Yidoni gets skila. I don't know what the death penalty is for the other things. But no, since Yidoni were bichlal, the machshefa, and it's yotza min haklal lilamed, lo lilamed al atzmo yatsa, ela lilamed al haklal kulo yatsa. You get it? In other words, this is how we know that all magic, all sorcery, even though the Torah simply says it's a capital crime, and the Torah does not say what the punishment is, that is how we know it's skila, from Yidoni. Now, you can easily make a mistake. As I say, you're going to see this type of drasha a lot, and you're going to wonder, like, what am I doing? Am I doing a mamatzinu? You could have described, maybe I'm making a mamatzinu from Yidoni, but technically, you're using a different klal. It's a davar shaya bichlal, v'yatsa min haklal l'lamed. I don't know if you ever did this. They probably stopped doing it 100 years ago. But when I was in grammar school, so we used to. I actually love this. We used to diagram sentences. I don't know. This is the way they used to teach English. Like you had to say, what's the verb, what's the subject, what's the predicate. Actually, you get a very good understanding of language that way. So part of what you do when you learn drasha gemaras, and again, as I say, it happens to be that the Gemaras we learn in our Sameach tend not to be heavily drasha Gemaras, so maybe you haven't been exposed to it that much. But when you learn drasha Gemaras, part of what it would help you to do is to diagram which midah is being used, because often the Gemara does not articulate. In other words, the Gemara will make this drasha without saying, we are now going to be doing davar shaya bichlal v'yatsa min haklal l'lamed. So you're going to have to plug it in. You're going to have to diagram it and understand when we are doing it. Now, here's an interesting question. L'chaira, this seems to conflict with the midah we looked at yesterday called klal uprat. Now, remember that. Klal uprat is when the Torah gave you a general statement and then gave you a specific example, klal and then prat. So what was the rule? That the only thing that is covered by the halacha is the prat and nothing else. This is not klal uprat, this is klal uprat. Now, l'chaira, if I would apply, let's take this example, because this shows you an interesting confusion, like, how do you know when you apply one midah or another midah? Because it's going to lead to contradictory results. The Torah made a general statement. People who practice magic die. That's a klal. The Torah then says, Yidoni gets stoned, which is a specific type of magic. So if I would have applied the rule of klal followed by a prat, I would have said, fakert, the only magicians that get the death penalty at all are Yidoni, and nobody else even gets the death penalty. Klal uprat, in other words, you see how you get the opposite results. If I apply the methodology of a klal and then a prat, I would only give a death penalty to Yidoni. Ein bichlal ela masha befrat. But instead, I apply another rule. Davar shahaya bichlal v'yatsa min haklal l'lamed lo l'lamed al atzma yatsa ela l'lamed al haklal kulo yatsa. So fakert, I'm then taking the skila of Yidoni and applying it to everything. Why don't I apply the midah of klal uprat, which would lead to the opposite result. Like, how do I know? And it's not how do I know, how do Chazal know? Klal uprat versus davar shaya b'chlal v'yatzam and klal ulamed, because every case of davar shaya b'chlal, the yatzam and a klal ulamed is essentially a klal and a prat. So, as I mentioned, there are svarim that are written on the Yud Gimel Middos, even from the Rishonim and even from the Ga'anim. And one of the most authoritative svarim on this is a sefer called Halichos Olam, which you can actually get. And the Halichos Olam explains that klal uprat is referring to listings in like a single pasuk. When the Torah says, if you steal an object, and then it mentions an ox, a sheep, a garment. A list, klal uprat, is referring to listings that start with general and then give you specifics. Here you have two different verses. They're not in a list. The Torah is not listing. The Torah says in verse number 1, witchcraft gets death penalty. And then in some other verse it mentions ohr.edu. So in such a situation you don't apply the klal and prat rules because they are not in an enumeration or a listing form. And we have this new principle, davar shahaya bichlal v'yatsa min haklal l'lamed. I just want to find you want some more examples here. Lo l'lamed al atzma yatsa el l'lamed al haklal kulitzma. Just give me a second here. I want to find something. I'm sorry, I have to. Okay, I guess we'll have to keep this Torah Shabbal Peh, I guess. Really have it? Okay. Alrighty. So that's an example of that klal. Davar shaya b'chlal. Now, let me give you a second example of this midah. The Torah says in the Ten Commandments, the Cedar by Shabbos, Loi saseh kol malacha. You're not allowed to do what is called malacha on Shabbos. And we know, this is really halacha Moshe Sinai more or less, that there are 39 activities that are prohibited for malacha. Right? Any one of these 39 activities is forbidden on Shabbos. The Torah, now that's in Yisro. That's in what? That is in the Aseret Hadibros. In Parshas Vayakel, which will be the parsha after this week, the Torah says, Lo sivaru eish b'chol moshvosechem b'yom haShabbos. Do not make fires on Shabbos. Now, again, Lo sivaru eish is a davar shahaya bichlal. It was in the category. Don't do work includes fire. It's one of the 39 malachas. V'yotza min haklal. And yet the Torah then mentions it separately. L'lamed, to teach me something. Of course, it doesn't tell you what it's teaching you. I'll come to that. See, ohr.edu is going to be an easier example than this. Because ohr.edu, we know what it's teaching me. Because the Torah says, beferish, it's teaching me you get skila. Sometimes it's not going to be pashut what it's teaching me. Like here, because what does the Torah say? The Torah says you're not allowed to have fire, to make fire. That's not teaching me anything new at all, because I already know that from malacha. But we'll see in a moment, whatever it's coming to teach me is not only teaching me something in the malacha of fire, but it's teaching me something in all the malachas. Lo l'lamed al atzmo yatsa, ela l'lamed al haklal kulo yatsa. Now, the issue that as I just said, the issue that makes this example a little more difficult is, okay, whatever it's coming to teach me is not only teaching me about Havara, but it's teaching me about the klal, which Havara was part of. Okay, great. What is it teaching me? So here, what it's teaching me is the following. It's teaching me a concept in Hilchos Shabbos that is called lechalek. Lechalek means to divide. To understand that a little bit, you need a little bit of a background. Let's imagine, we know that if you commit certain averos b'shogeg, inadvertently, you have to bring a korban chatas, a sin offering. Now, the question is, what happens if I do many averos? Do I bring only one chatas or many chatos? So the basic distinction is, if you do different averos, each avera requires the same, different chatas. So if I eat chaylev and I'm mechalel Shabbos, and I eat on Yom Kippur, all inadvertently, because b'mezid there's no korban. So chaylev, Yom Kippur, chilul Shabbos, I got to bring 3 chatos. Okay? If, on the other hand, I do the same avera over and over again, I only bring 1 chatas. So if I ate chaylev and I ate another kazayas of chaylev, another kazayas of chaylev, I bring 1 chatas. Right? So this is a well-known rule in korban chatas, that repeating an avera multiple times, you only bring 1 chatas. Different averos, you bring different chatos. Now, when it comes to Shabbos, this creates a certain conceptual difficulty. If, for example, I write, and I write, and I write, and I write, that's pashut, I bring 1 chatas. If I harvest, I harvest, I harvest, I harvest, I bring 1 chatas. But how do you understand if I do 2 different malachos? I harvest and I write. Is that the same avera twice? You see the 2 svaras here. Technically, even though I did 2 different malachos, what lav was I over on? Loi saseh kol malacha. So you might have made an argument that even if I do 2 different malachos, since it's 1 lav being transgressed twice, I should only bring 1 chatas? Or do you say, since they are distinct malachos, you bring 2 chatais? So, this is what Lechalek teaches me. It's very clear that if I harvested and I lit a fire, I would bring 2 chatais. Because fire is not only lo sasa kamalacha, fire has its own lav, lo savaruesh. That's lechalek, it's differentiated. So memela, if Havara teaches me that you're chayav a separate chatas for Havara, even if I did another malacha, hu hadin on the whole klal of the 39 malachos of Shabbos, that if I did different malachos, I'm chayav different chatos. Again, so let's plug it in. Davar shahaya bichlal. Something that was part of a generalization, i.e., the prohibition of starting a fire was already part of the general prohibition of not doing malacha. V'yatsa min haklal. It was separated from the klal by creating a separate prohibition of lo savaru eish. Lelamed, and that teaches me, now it doesn't say what it's teaching me, but in this case, it's teaching me that if I do a malacha plus havara, I'm chayiv 2 chatais, because havara is a separate lav. Lo lelamed alatzmo yatsa. It is not only coming to teach me about havara, ela lelamed ala klal kulo yatsa. It's coming to teach me about all the malachos of Shabbos, that if I harvest and I write, even though it's 1 lav, leisasa kol malacha, I am mechuyev 2 chataot, even though if I did the same malacha twice, I'm only chayiv 1. Okay? You get that drasha. That's called havara lechalek yatzas. Havara was mentioned separately to differentiate it in a chiyuv chatas. Again, all of this pilpul is predicated on 2 very well-known rules. Normally, if you do the same avera multiple times, only 1 chatas. If you do different averos, multiple chatais, the shaila is, how do you classify different malachos, all of which are under the same lav of lo sasa kol malacha? And the chiddush of havara is that we regard each malacha as a separate avera. And that's why you're going to be chayav chatas for every malacha that you do. Now, I need to qualify that a little bit, because that the din of lechalek only applies if you're a shegeg on malacha rather than Shabbos. But by that I mean the following. Shegeg means inadvertent, right? If you're machal Shabbos b'mezid, there's no sin offering at all. There's either kares, b'dei shamayim, if you weren't warned, or there's an actual misa, by Beis Din, if you were warned, right? So when I talk about chatas, we're talking about inadvertent malacha. Now, there are two types of ways you could be a shogeg. One is a shogeg that I didn't realize it was Shabbos. I thought it was Sunday. An example might be that I thought Shabbos was over at 6:30, and really it's over at 6:35, and I did malacha at 6:30. So my shogeg, I know you're not allowed to write, I know you're not allowed to harvest, but I'm a shogeg because I thought today was Sunday. That's called shigagat Shabbos. The other type of shogeg is, I know it's Shabbos, but I thought you're allowed to do these malachas. So the rule that if you do two different malachos on Shabbos, you're chayav two chatos, lechalek, only applies if you know it's Shabbos and you were a shogeg on the malacha. So that's two shogegs. I was a shogeg, I thought you could harvest. I was a shogeg, I thought you could write. But if your shogeg is not on the malachos, your shogeg is, I didn't know it was Shabbos. That's one shogeg for everything. So even if I did 39 malachos on Shabbos, I only bring one chatas because I'm a shogeg on Shabbos. Right? So I'm just qualifying that the statement of lechalek, that you're chayav a separate chatas for every malacha, this doesn't come from the midah, this is just a halacha. Is only if what you are is a shigigas malachos v'zadon Shabbos. You know it's Shabbos. You're a shogeg on the malacha. Masha'en kain, if you are a shigigas malacha v'zadon Shabbos, meaning you know it's Shabbos, but you think the malachas are mutter, that is when you're chayav v'chatas for every malacha. And the Gemara has a shaila, what if you're a double shogeg? What if I think it's Sunday and I also think you're allowed to do these malachas? Which rule do I apply? Do I apply the rule of shigagas malacha and you're chayav multiple chatais or not? By the way, this raises a very scary issue about Balei Tshuva. Let's just, because the halacha is like this. The halacha is, if you violated Shabbos, b'shogeg, even when there's no Beis HaMikdash, you owe the Beis HaMikdash a korban chatas. You got to write it down, which means to say, when the Beis HaMikdash is going to be built, Bezras Hashem, b'meir of Yameinu, all of us will have to bring chatais. So here's the question. If somebody, through this, we'll all have to bring some chatas, but the question is, if somebody was mechalel Shabbos for 15 years, because they weren't from, like, how many chatos will they owe the Beis HaMikdash? Yeah. Yeah, a tinok shenishba is mechuyev in a korban chatas. The Gemara says they are mechuyev, but for a tinok shenishba, they may only be mechuyev either one chatas, just one general chatas, or at most a chatas for every malacha. So you might have to come up with 39 chatos, but it's not going to be every malacha for every Shabbos. That would be millions. Right? So if I was not Shomer Shabbos, so b'shogeg will assume. So my maximum chatos are going to be 39, one for every malacha, and that will cover the malacha that I was over on for 10 years of Shabbos and the like. So be careful. Somebody, and the reason I'm bringing this up is somebody had actually sent me a shadow. They were learning the laws of korban chatas, and they were chozrei b'tshuva, and the guy was afraid. The guy, am I going to owe the Beis HaMikdash 10 million korban chatases when the time comes? So I say you're going to max out at 39, which is not, that may be that's a little bit of a penalty, stiff penalty, but it's not going to be that bad. And korban chatas doesn't have a minimum value, so you can even use a very cheap, inexpensive animal as long as it's not blemished for a korban chatas. Okay, so I gave you, what I did today was, I gave you two examples of davar shahaya bichlal, v'yatsa min haklal l'lamed, right? Something that was in a general category. I did find my paper. 1 second. Because I have a third example. I don't remember it. 1 second. Yeah. Let me give you a third example. Okay, because I think the examples will clarify it. The Torah says in Vayikra that if you eat anything kodesh, anything that was sanctified to Hashem, and you are tameh, you're tameh, you're chayav kares. There's a chayav kares for eating kodshim bitumat haguf when you are tameh by contact with either a dead body or even a dead animal. Now, there's then another pasuk that says, if I eat a sholamim when I'm tameh, I'm chayav kares. Now, l'chayra, that pasuk is superfluous. We already have a general pasuk that says anything that's kodesh. That includes olah, chatas, anything. So why does the Torah mention specifically, if I eat shlamim, I'm chayav kares? In other words, this is davar shahaya bichlal. Shlamim were included in the general statement. If you eat kodesh betumas haguf, you're chayav kares. V'yotza min haklal. And yet the Torah mentions it separately, lolame, to teach you. Now again, here you're going to have the question, what does it teach me? It's not telling me anything new. We'll get to that. But whatever it's coming to teach me, we'll go back on the whole klal. So, what is it coming to teach me? It says, the word kodesh, there are two types of things that can be sanctified to the Beis HaMikdash. There are korbanos, and then there's something called kodshei berek habayis, things that are sanctified for temple maintenance. Let me give you an example. Apples. Let's assume I have a beautiful apple orchard. I have pounds of apples. I want to be makdish the apples for the Beis HaMikdash. Now, what does the Beis HaMikdash do with apples? There are no apple korbanos, right? So this is called berek habayis. So if I'm makdish food or a table or a chair or a computer, you can be makdish your car to the Beis HaMikdash. But what happens? They're not going to put the car on the mizbeach. So this is called berek habayis, meaning to say the temple uses it for maintenance, meaning to say they can sell the car and use the money to fix the walls or whatever it is. This is called berek habayis, the holiness of berek habayis. So there is kedushat mizbeach. There is the designation of things that will go on the altar, animals, ketores. And then there are things that don't go on the altar. They could be foods too, or non-food. And that goes leberek habayis. That is typically sold, and the money is used for berek habayis. Okay, so one is called kedushas mizbeach, the other is called kedushas berek habayis. Now, when the Torah says anyone that eats kodesh when they're tameh is chayav kares, standing alone, that would have meant either type of kedusha, either kedushas mizbeach or kedushas berek habayis. Meaning, if you're makdash a korban and it's shechted, and I eat it when I'm tameh, I'm chayav kares. And if you're makdash a bunch of apples, leberek habayis, and I eat the apple and I'm tameh, I'm chayav kares. But then the Torah mentions shlamim. So what is it teaching me? Shlamim is kedushas mizbeach, not berek habayis. And since shlamim is teaching me something about the klal, not just itself, so it teaches me that which the Torah said, if you eat kodesh betuma, your chayav kares, is only kedushas mizbeach like shlamim, and not kedushas berek habayis. Now the question is it usher to eat the apple of Fantami? That's another shaila, but you're not chayav kares for eating berek habayis. So now let's apply the rule. Davar shahaya bichlal. Sholamim was in the category of kodesh betuma. Yotza min haklal. The Torah mentioned it separately. Lilameh, to teach me something that kedushas mizbeach. Lo lelamed al atzmo yatsa. It's not only coming for itself. Lelamed ala klal kulo yatsa. It's lelamed on the whole klal. That the klal that says, if I'm tameh and I eat kodesh, I get kares, only applies to mizbeach and not to berek habayis. See how this works. Now, once again, the Halichos Olam points out, why don't you apply the midah of klal uprat and say you're only chayav kares for shlamim? Because you have a klal of kodesh, then you have a prat of shlamim, right? You should only be chayav for shlamim, not for ola, not for chatas. The answer is, you don't apply klal uprat when it's not in a list. These are two different verses, right? One is general, one is specific, but they're not in a listing. They're not in an enumeration. So we don't focus on the klal uprat rule. We focus on midah number 8, davar shahaya bichlal, v'yatsa min haklal lelamed, lo lelamed al atzmo yatsa, ela lelamed al haklal kulo yatsa. Okay, I hope this makes sense. It gets a little dense, a little difficult. And as I say, this is one of the what you call hidden middos. Once you know this midah, you will notice it a lot, even though the Gemara does not call it to your attention. But Breisos do this all the time. Like it'll say something like, Ein li ela havara, right? Minayin, something else. And really what it's doing is it's actually applying this particular midah, okay? So we did 3 examples. We had the example of machashefa and ohr.edu. That ohr.edu teaches me that all magic gets skila. We had the example of havara for Shabbos that teaches me lechalek. And we have the example of shlamim betumas haguf, impurity of the guf, that teaches me that the chiyuv kares is only for kedushas mizbeach and not for kedushas berek habayis. By the way, just in terms of general knowledge, nothing to do with this midah, there is a very important difference between something that's hektish for the mizbeach and something that's hektish for berek habayis, and that is, can you redeem it? Let's imagine, again, nothing to do with the midah, this is just general knowledge for you. If I'm makdish an animal to be a burnt offering, a peace offering, a sin offering, whatever it is, and I change my mind and I want to redeem it by selling it or by setting aside money and transferring the holiness, you cannot redeem anything that is sanctified for a korban. Kedushas mizbeach is not redeemable until and unless it gets a blemish. If my korban gets a blemish, I can't bring it as a korban anymore, but it still has holiness. So what I can do is, I can either sell it and have the holiness transferred on the money, or I don't have to sell it. I can just set aside money and say, the holiness should go from here onto the money, and then I buy another animal to be a korban. That's called pidyon, that's called redemption. And for a korban, redemption cannot take place unless there is a mum, a blemish. Masha'ein kein berek habayis, by definition, you redeem it right away. That's exactly what you do. Look at the example I gave you before. I makdish a bag of apples to the Beis HaMikdash. Now, the Beis HaMikdash doesn't need apples. So what are they going to do? They're going to sell it, generate money, and use the money for temple repairs. Now, when they sell it, that's pidyon. The holiness goes off the apples and onto the money. So, and it's not only the Beis HaMikdash. I myself can do that. I could be makdish the apples, and then I could sell the apples and bring the Beis HaMikdash the money. So this is an important distinction. Kedushas berek habayis has immediate redemption. Kedushas mizbeach has no redemption unless there is a mum, and if there's no mum, it's not redeemable. You cannot redeem the animal. Now, in the Masechtas of Kachim, like Tmura, B'chayres, you have all sorts of fascinating questions. Can you make an animal that could have been a korban? Can I make it berek habayis? In other words, I gave you an example of berek habayis. A makdish a car, a makdish a computer, a makdish a bag of apples. Can I be makdish a sheep and say I'm only makdish it for Bedek Habayis? Or is that impossible? Because if it's something that could be brought as a korban, you can't make a Bedek Habayis out of it. So a lot of discussions in the Gemara. Can you take something that's kosher to be a korban and just make it a Bedek Habayis Kedusha? Again, Mitzvah Hashem, when you learn Kachim, you'll go over all of those questions. Okay, so I'm giving you a little hint that we expect you to eventually learn Cedar Kachim. Okay, so this is Midah number 8. Maybe it's enough for today. I don't want anyone's brain to explode. But this is Kol Davar Shaya Bichlal, V'yotza Min HaKlal L'Lamed, Lo L'Lamed Al Atzmo Yotza, El L'Lamed Al Kul Yotza. I hope the words at least make sense, and you can think of these examples when you apply the rule. Eventually, I'm going to go back and give you the actual examples for all of them, but right now, we'll start with this one. Okay, see you tomorrow.